I'm very honored to be here. As Serena mentioned, I used to be the nuts and bolts guy, and as I will describe in my lecture, I had an enlightenment experience in 2012, which I'll talk about, which was as dramatic as the first UFO sighting I saw. It changed my life as much as my first UFO sighting, and I completely gave up because Hillary got me back in, but I gave up on the presidents. I gave them all my documents away, and I said, if you want to understand reality, if you want to understand UFOs, you have to understand consciousness. That was the download I got. It was clear. It came with absolute 100% certainty that it's right. So that's what I'm going to talk about. And when I had the download in 2012, suddenly I could see. Suddenly I could read the street signs. Everything made sense. And in 1975, well, I'll start here, how it started for me. This is the only anti-ballistic missile unit that ever went operational in the United States. It was in Tacoma, North Dakota. North Dakota had 300 nuclear weapons. I lived just north of the border. We knew that if there was ever a nuclear exchange between the United States and Russia, we were gone. Because the first target of Russian nuclear missiles is the missiles in the northern states. You got to take out the missiles, otherwise you're never going to see what happens because you're gone. So this was the main target, and there was 300 nuclear weapons. North Dakota, it was stated that if North Dakota had been a country, it would have been a nuclear superpower. Had a huge number of nuclear weapons. In 1975, they started to install this $6 billion operation. It was a bunch of Spartan and Sprint missiles. That was pre-Star Wars. This was going to take out the Russian missiles, the incoming missiles, to protect the American missiles. So this is what's called Nixon's pyramid. It's a giant array that would pick up the Russian missiles as they come in through outer space. And you can see the missile silos in the front. They installed them and started installing them in February of 1975, and they started taking them out in November of 1975. And on our side of the border, we just got inundated with UFOs. It's one of the biggest UFO flaps ever. I wasn't interested in UFOs. I just went to see this object. This is one of the good photographs that was taken of. It's called Charlie Red Star. And the only reason I went out, I had no interest. I was interested in near-death experiences. I've been interested in Edgar Casey. Wasn't interested in UFOs. I just went to see what everybody else was looking at. I believe that you buy the lottery ticket. We bought the lottery ticket. I believe we would never see anything when we went out there. We went out there, and within an hour, this thing flew right in front of the car and absolutely changed my life. I quit university. I said, this is what I'm going to do. Nobody would publish the manuscript that I did, and it still hasn't been published, of this, all the encounters that these people had. And the local publisher who should have published it said to me, Mr. Cameron, you may believe in this kind of stuff. Count me among the unbelievers. And at that point, I gave up on UFO sightings. I have really not done UFO sightings since. I said, this is a total waste of time. All I want to know is, what did I see? Somebody must know what I saw. So I started my search, and I wrote this book a couple of years ago, and it's basically the story that I tell. And George Knapp says this is the best version of Area 51. If you want to know what happened at Area 51, the story, breaking story in 1989, basically I say the U.S. government has been leaking the story all along. They're protecting the classified material, but they are actually leaking what's going on. A lot of the ideas that you have were given by the American government. So I wrote this book, and then I followed it up with this book, Alien Bedtime Stories. I have a few of them here. This one goes into a number of presidents. I tell the Hillary Clinton story, Hillary Clinton's involvement in UFOs back in the 1990s. And I moved along, and in 2012, I have this download experience. And when I had the download experience, I started to research downloads, and I suddenly found out that a lot of people had downloads. This is not common to me. Very dramatic, and I wrote this manuscript, which still hasn't been published. It's been finished for a year, and basically it looks at all the different types of downloads. And it goes through music, it goes through inventions, Nobel Prizes, and what you come to realize is that we think that we are inventing things, we think we are doing things, and basically when you come right down to it, most of the stuff that we've gotten has come from somewhere else. I'll give you the theory of relativity. Theory of relativity came to Einstein in a dream. He actually stated at one point, my entire career was based on a meditation on my dream. His entire career was based on a dream. The dream of going down on the toboggan slide and going at the speed of light. The idea of the quantum atom was given the Nobel Prize in 1922 by Bohr. It was also in a dream. That's where he got it from. The laser came on a park bench. Guy was sitting on a park bench, and all the material just downloaded in his head. He'd worked on the problem, but the solution came sitting on a park bench. It's now actually made it into a statue where he was sitting when this download came. The idea for the hologram came on a park bench. Guy was sitting watching people play tennis, and suddenly the idea for the hologram came into his head, complete with all the details, and then he developed it. The uncertainty principle, Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, was developed while he was walking in a park in the middle of the night in Copenhagen. This idea just suddenly popped into his head. The 12 steps and 12 traditions. The AA people are very unhappy with me when I mention this. The 12 steps and the 12 traditions was written by a guy by the name of Wilson, and he states quite clearly that it came to him off on a Ouija board from a 15th century monk by the name of Boniface. The idea for Google. The search engine came to Larry Page in the middle of the night. He's talked about it many times. It came in a dream in the middle of the night, the whole idea for the Google and the search engine and all that kind of stuff. Harry Potter, all 7 Harry Potter books came in an instantaneous download to J.K. Rowling's on a train going from Manchester into London, England. Came in a split second. She talked. If you go Google search her on Oprah, you'll see her telling the story to Oprah, how she didn't have a pen and all this stuff was flooding into her head. The Wizard of Oz came in an instantaneous download. Edison developed a system, and this is what we'll talk about later, the neurology, that he developed a system where he would go into the hypnagogic state. He learned how to go into the hypnagogic state, and that's where he got a lot of his material. 3,000 books of notes that he got by using this technique. Then we go to 150 songs. I'm a musical idiot. You'll see how I get into music and aliens. I got dragged into it like everything else, didn't want to do it, had no background in music, I'd never listened to music, never bought 2 records in my entire life. I've got 150 songs in one of the appendixes that came in dreams. Some of the most famous songs of the 20th century came in dreams, and I'm going to give you one in a minute. 100 songs I have that came spontaneously during the waking state to musicians that came spontaneously or within a couple of minutes to them. Lyrics, everything, just boom, in their head, and it just appeared. Fractal image compression software that's used to analyze photographs from satellites came in a dream. The EEG came in a telepathic experience between the guy who invented the EEG and his sister. The Xerox machine came to the guy that invented the Xerox machine, says quite clearly it came from spirits. He's the guy that financed all the reincarnation research in the United States. TV came to a guy plowing a field, instantaneous download, how to invent the TV in the 1920s. The optical laser circuits came in a dream. Alternating motor came to Tesla. He was walking through a park with a friend in Budapest, and suddenly this idea of the alternating motor popped into his head, and he drew it in the sand for the guy as they were walking through. The periodic table came in a dream. The double helix DNA came to Crick when he was on LSD. This is one of the most important slides of the whole lecture. You have all these downloads. I had the download. These people have had the download. There's a survey that has just been released. It's called the Free Survey, 2,500 experiencers, people who believe they've had interaction with aliens or with non-local entities, have filled out a survey and they outed themselves, and they're telling their story, and they're answering 600 questions. And this is one of the questions from phase 1. It is extremely important. It says, and this is 41%, and in 1991 there was a Roper survey was done that determined that there was 2% of the American people are probably experiencers, people who have been abducted or have had some sort of encounter with aliens. 2%, which is 6.5 million people. The figure here is 41%, not 41 people out of 6.5 million. 41% of all these 6.5 million people have answered yes to the following question. Do you believe that you possess information about advanced technology, advanced physics, or other scientific information that you've never read or learned in your normal environment? And 41% of people say, yeah, I got that. I got material in my head. I don't know where it came from. They've got what is called downloads. They're being downloaded, and I'll show you clearly, they're being downloaded by aliens, by some sort of non-local consciousness. They've tapped into it, and they've got this. So you have these people, and I say, is this not extremely important? That these people, and the vast majority of the UFO community, rejects this material. They do not want to deal with this survey with these people. They're still chasing lights in the sky, trying to measure how many red ones, how many green ones, whatever. And you have 41% of experiencers, millions of people, who are saying that they are getting scientific material. I had one girl at the Contact in the Desert walked up to me and showed me her cell phone. Said, look at this. She showed me it, and she says 25 pages long, it's on quantum physics. And I said, you got that? You got that in the download? She said, yeah, I'm a secretary. I've never studied quantum physics. There's a lot of these people running around, and the UFO community is basically ignoring this. And I'm saying, I think this is kind of important. If these people are getting this material, we should check with them. What are they getting? Are we getting material that we could use? And why are these people being downloaded this material? Bashar talks about this. He spoke here 2 years ago. I always reference him. He's an alien channeler. And a lot of the material, I reference him because he's very close. Every time I get an idea and I go and check with Bashar, he basically says the same thing. And here's what he says about where these ideas are coming from. I thought that the majority of it was. He says it's all. Here's Bashar talking about where ideas come from.
The higher self conceives. The physical brain receives. The physical personality mind perceives. The physical personality mind does not conceive of anything. The physical mind is not capable of generating an idea, not one. Not one. Any idea you have ever had has never come from your physical mind, not one. It can only perceive the result of the idea that was received by the brain from the conception of the higher self.
And that's what I basically came to the conclusion, that this stuff is, people are tapping into this from someplace else. Just to give you an example, just for entertainment purposes, Star Wars is big, so here's Obi-Wan Kenobi. Here's an example of a download. Very, very interesting story. To give you a background on this, Alec Guinness, this is in the 1950s, he goes to a restaurant in Los Angeles, and he's not able to get into the restaurant, it's full, and he has to leave the restaurant. He doesn't have a reservation. He runs into the famous actor James Dean, and here's him telling the story of what happened.
And I said, how fast can you drive? This is right, 150. And I said, have you driven it? He said, I've never been in it at all. And some strange thing came over me, some almost different voice. And I said, look, I won't join your table unless you want me to, but I must say something. Please do not get into that car, because if you do, and I looked at my watch, and I said, if you get into that car at all, it's now Thursday, whatever the day was, 10 o'clock at night, and by 10 o'clock at night, next Thursday, you'll be dead if you get into that car. I don't know. Nonsense. Someone had dinner, a charming dinner, and he was dead the following Thursday afternoon in that car.
And there's the car. I got dragged into the music thing through this download thing. I got a phone call from a very prominent experiencer who Mel Gibson was actually going to do a movie on him. And he phoned me up and he said, Grant, I want to let you know the message is in the music. And I said, yeah, whatever. Because I'm a musical idiot. I can't play an instrument. I've never listened to music. Not interested in music. The only thing he said was one of the musicians that he named was Neil Young. And the song was called After the Gold Rush. If you listen to the lyrics, it's the experiencer message. We're destroying the world. We're treating the world like a gold rush. When the gold is gone, it's going to become a ghost town. The silver seeds, the flying saucers are going to come and take the chosen ones away. He wrote it in 1968. He said he was totally stoned when he wrote it. He had no idea. If it hadn't been for Neil Young being from Winnipeg, where I'm from, I never would have gotten into the alien thing. When I suddenly saw what was going on, I could not believe what was going on. The number of musicians that have been involved in the UFO thing. This is one of them. This is a cartoon dealing with dubstep. Dubstep is one of the musicians, Skrillex, I think is his name, is an experiencer, no doubt about it. He had encounters as a child. And I'll list some of them. This is only a few. I'll list a few of the musicians that I have. I've actually written a book, which my father would just die laughing if he knew that I'd written a book on music. And I go through I list about 30 musicians, prominent musicians that I believe are experiencers, who've had alien abduction experiences, have had encounters with aliens. It includes John Lennon, Ace Frehley from Kiss, Sammy Hagar from Van Halen, Sheryl Crow, David Bowie, Davies from the Kinks, all the Moody Blues, Jerry Garcia from Grateful Dead, Elvis Presley, Ellie Goulding, OG, who's a rapper out of San Francisco, Cat Stevens. The list goes on and on and on. I actually did a lecture at a golf club in a high prominent golf club in Scottsdale, and I figured I need a story about golfers, somebody who's seen a UFO, somebody who's been abducted. I could not find a single one. When I went through the music thing, at one point I was getting 2 musicians a day that I believe had been abducted. It's unbelievable. And I'll go through a little bit of this today. Here's one of the songs that came in a download that came, Let It Be. Paul McCartney's had 3 songs come in dreams. This is one of them, Let It Be. I'll play it and then we'll go over what it actually means. The story has always been, and I believed it, was the lyrics came from the Mother Mary in the Bible. It's not. The story actually is told by McCartney. It's the late 1960s, the Beatles are breaking up. McCartney is very distressed. He's trying to keep the Beatles together. He separates with his girlfriend. He goes to bed at night, and his mother, whose name was Mary, died when he was 14 years old. His mother comes to him in a dream. And he said, it was so nice to see her. I was so happy that I could finally see her again. And he said, she said to me, it's okay, let it be. That's where the song comes from. His mother came to him in a dream. His song Yesterday also came in a dream, one of the most prominent songs of the 20th century. He was so amazed by this song, he played it for people. He thought somebody else had written it. And after a couple of months, he realized, no, nobody had written this song, and he had gotten this in a dream. And he had a song called No Regrets that came in a dream. He believed he was playing with the Rolling Stones and woke up and said, well, that was a great song, the Rolling Stones played it, and then suddenly realized, they never played that song. Okay. The Beatles were also into UFOs. A lot of them are into UFOs. The Beatles were into UFOs. Here's a commercial from 1974, filmed here in Los Angeles, with John Lennon and Ringo Starr for Ringo Starr's 1974 album called Goodnight Vienna. Here there is from the 1951 movie War of the Worlds, where Ringo just replaces himself with the alien coming out of the spacecraft. This is a dramatic slide. As I said, I moved from nuts and bolts to the woo-woo side, and I got a lot of flack from it. People couldn't believe I had done it. And I said, well, I really didn't do it by choice. I was teleported there. And this is one of the key slides. If I were to tell you that I had this experience, you would say, who cares? This is the Moody Blues. These guys sold 50 million albums. They talked to a friend of mine, Colin Andrews.
Well, and another one.
Let me just set this up. They talked to Colin Andrews. Colin Andrews has talked to 5 musicians that have come to him, prominent musicians, to tell them their UFO stories. And here's Colin Andrews talking about the Moody Blues coming, and this Mike Pinder and the lead guitarist come to him, and Colin says, you could tell they weren't making the story, because this guy would say, and then they were telling the story back and forth. And here's the story that they told to Colin Andrews.
Well, and another one of my presentations, out of the audience came Mike Pinder of the Moody Blues. And Mike, I spent the rest of the afternoon after my presentation with Mike Pinder and his lead guitarist of the Moody Blues, who were telling me the most extraordinary experiences, UFO and ET experiences, they have had as a group and individually, that form the very reason that they wrote certain numbers, the very strong, very powerful words and meanings, lost in a lost world, and very profound numbers. Anybody that's followers of the Moody Blues music knows this is not a 10-second, flip of a switch and pass. Let's listen to the next. These are very profound, and inserted that Mike told me himself that these numbers, these songs, were placed into the public domain from somewhere else.
They went on to say that they remembered before they were born. They remembered their past life together, and they remembered just before they were born they had been in a round room with some elder people, and that they were told that they were going to be musicians in this world, and that they were going to put lyrics into songs to raise consciousness of the world. This is the Moody Blues talking. And so I say, if any of these stories, and a lot of experiences will tell this story, a lot of them will tell this story, if one person is right, the UFO problem is not a physical problem. It's got nothing to do with aliens here to give us stuff. It's got nothing to do with free energy. It is an ontological spiritual problem if it goes back before birth. It involves multiple lives. It involves soul contracts. And the Moody Blues are one of the prime people who are telling this story, that they agreed to what they're doing in this present life. John Keel was very famous in the paranormal field. There's always been a conflict between the consciousness field and the UFO field. There still is. As I said, I had a lot of flack when I sort of gave up on the nuts and bolts stuff and went to consciousness. And John Keel said, he described this sort of division between consciousness people and UFO people. He said, a parapsychologist will travel halfway around the world to investigate a poltergeist case, but if his next door neighbor is bathed in a beam of light on a lonely back road, the scientist will regard it as nothing more than a dinner table anecdote. And that's basically maybe still the situation. What this free survey, these 2,500 people have filled out this survey, people who believe they've had this encounter. Edgar Mitchell was one of the people that's a part of gathering this survey. He's just passed away. He was very interested in experiencers, realized that they had some important material to put out. And so I'm going to give you the links here. I'm going to give you some of the slides. And you decide for yourself, does UFOs have anything to do with paranormal, with the psychic, with the consciousness? Here are some of the answers to questions from these 2,500 people who have filled out the survey. When I was a child, I was very psychic. 49% of all people who've had encounters with aliens say, yeah, I was psychic. I was very psychic as a child. Telepathic or other forms of psychic awareness between me and others increased. 58% of them say, oh yeah, this ability to talk telepathically. Was your consciousness separated from your body at the time of the ET experience? 66% say yes. This is not a physical phenomenon. The more you look at the UFO thing, the less physical it becomes. Did you feel a sense of expanded consciousness in the presence of these ETs? 70% said yes. I felt flashes of cosmic consciousness at times. 60% said yes. That was going to come. 61%. 61. Hang on, I got to get rid of this thing here. Okay. In my opinion, the widespread occurrence of UFO experiences is part of a larger plan to promote the evolution of consciousness as a on a species-wide scale. 71.5% say yes, they believe that. These are the people that are actually having the encounters. My mind became tremendously expanded compared to how it functioned before. 54% said yes. Have you ever met a non-human intelligent being, an ET, during an out-of-body experience? 43% said yes. Have you ever had a near-death experience? And the answer to this one staggered the people who were doing the survey. 35%. They were very shocked. And they were actually going to set up a committee to investigate how could this happen. And I said, it's very simple how it happens. Is you got to see, is the world random or is it pattern? That's one of the mistakes we make in the way we look at the world. We believe this thing that it's a random world. It's random things. But if I'm a remote viewer or a psychic and I say to you, you're going to have a car accident tomorrow, and you have a car accident tomorrow, and you have a near-death experience, is that a random event? No, it's not a random event. And we know for a fact, we didn't believe it before, but we know for a fact that anybody who's had an abduction experience is what's called a lifer. You don't get abducted one time when you're 25 years old. If you've been abducted, you've been abducted your whole life. So the alien experience is not random, and neither is the near-death experience. And so it's very, very common to understand that you could have both people having both experiences. Have you ever met a deceased person and conversed with him or her? 46%. This is maybe the most important slide of the whole thing. 43%, or 37% of all experiencers who've had this encounter. While in this matrix-type reality, did you suddenly seem to understand everything? 37% said at one point during this experience, they understood everything in the universe. The answer to everything in the universe. And my initial thought was, well, how do you know it's everything in the universe? Maybe there's something on the far end of the universe, number 6 and number 7, they didn't show you. But I had my own download experience, so I know what they're going to say. They're going to say, I really can't explain it, but I just know. I know for certain, because it comes with absolute certainty. They knew everything in the universe, and then it was pulled away. As they left the experience, it was pulled away. Which makes an important point, is the fact that if they had pulled away, the aliens gave them access to everything in the universe, which means that aliens have the answer to everything in the universe. So when you look at the UFO experience and the aliens and you say, they're here to investigate, they're here to find out about our emotions, whatever. It doesn't make any sense. They have all the answers. They're not really here investigating anything. They're not trying to learn stuff. They have the universal Google. They know what the answer to everything is. And so this is very important that these people are talking about the fact that they were given the answer to everything from the aliens. So I would say, if you have these people who are getting the answer to everything, we can spend $20,000, $30,000 a year sending your kid to a university, and the answer is there. We have an access to the answer to everything in the universe. We just have to figure out how to access it, and the answers are there. This is one of the things people will say, a lot of this stuff is coming, these downloads are coming through genetic memory. And I say, whatever. I mean, the genes, it's like spontaneously, DNA spontaneously emerged in evolution. It's like, you know, Jesus feeding the 5,000 people with 2 fish and 5 loaves of bread. It's like where the rest of the food came. And it's like, it just arrived, just forget it. And that's the idea. So you may believe that genes are just emerged, and you may believe that there's such a thing as genetic memory. I'm going to play you this slide. This is, I think these are called the Sachs twins. They're autistic. And this is a key point because I'm going to get into neurology. All autistic people have left brain damage. So these are kids who can't dress themselves, they can't do anything, and here you're going to see them do savants type abilities where they're able to do things that are just out of this world. These kids are going to do calendar calculation, and what I want you to consider is this genetic memory? And watch the very end of the slide, this short clip, to see, are they calculating this, or are they downloading it from somewhere? Here's the short clip.
July 19th, a year 92,000.
July 19th, 92,000.
860.
92,860. That will be 92,860. July 19th.
Right, July 19th.
That will be July 18th, 92,840. That will be on a Monday.
All right. Now, July 19th, the year 470. Figure this one out.
July 19th, that will be on a Saturday.
Right. All right.
And they're always right.
I want to ask some other questions.
Yeah.
How many days in the year?
365.
Is it more than 365 or exactly 365?
I think it's 366.
366. All right. How many days in a week?
307.
How many months in a year?
12.
How many hours in a day?
24.
How many minutes in an hour?
10 minutes.
How many seconds in a minute?
10 seconds.
10 seconds. Sure it's not more than 10?
I'm sure.
Sure. All right. How much is 4 times 7?
4 times 7 enough?
No.
No, we'll do 4.
Well, Brian taught you for months.
Remember?
You remember when Brian taught you?
Yeah.
What day was that taught you on?
That in 1964. 64.
What month?
In February.
What war?
War 5.
Right. Now, 4 times 7 is how much?
Which is 21.
21. Could it be more?
Could be more.
So they can do these massive calculations, and when they multiply 6-digit numbers against each other, they're always right. You don't have to check, they're always right. And yet he can't multiply 4 times 7. The reason I'll give you up front is because the left brain does simple calculation, and the left brain is damaged. But the right brain is picking up these answers. And if you want to talk about, tomorrow there's a panel on UFOs and real strange things. The savant is some of the strangest things you'll ever see, the abilities that these people have. Here's another one. You can say these kids have a genetic gene that helps them calculate. It looks like they're not calculating. Here's another one that may involve, if we can believe there's a gene, maybe there's a gene for counting toothpicks. This is based on a true story. It comes from the Rain Man. The actual story involved 111 matchsticks that fell off a table. And as they were hitting the floor, these 2 savant twins that you saw before immediately called out 111. as the matchsticks hit the floor, and there was 111 matchsticks. Here's from Rain Man. The Rain Man does it, it's a toothpick. So you gotta ask, does somebody have a toothpick gene that helps them count toothpicks, or are they getting this from somewhere? Here's the, from the movie Rain Man.
Let me check it. Sorry about toothpicks. 82, 82, 82. 82 what? How much is this? Toothpick. It's not more than 2 toothpicks. But 246 total change. Fred, how many toothpicks? 250. Pretty close. Come on, let's go, Ray. 246. There's 4.
She says there's 4 in the box. So they have savants. You can take a whole jar full of peas and drop them, and as they hit the floor, they can tell how many peas there are. To show you how this is working, again, I say it's left brain being shut down, and the right brain accessing non-local consciousness. Here is an example that we can actually, we're doing experiments that prove this. This is done at the University of in Australia. It's Center for the Mind, and what they do is they magnetically stimulate the left side of the brain. Same as a savant. They create a savant type syndrome where they shut down the left side of the brain. They magnetically stimulate the left side of the brain, and then they get them to count dots on a screen. And here's the video where they describe this kid before and after. Now they haven't got it perfected, but they are getting there. So watch this.
Right. Again, I'm going to show you, as before, a number of dots on the screen, and I want you to just have a moment to look at them, and I want you to tell me how many you see.
When he first tried to count the dots, Mike seemed hesitant, but after a dose of magnetic stimulation, his responses are more confident.
103. 102. 62. Okay, so before the transcranial magnetic stimulation, you got 2 out of 20, which is very typical. That's about what most people get. But in your case, quite astonishingly, after TMS, you got 8 out of 20, which is better than our average.
So now we get to basic consciousness reality. Again, Bashar talks about this, and this is what it comes down to. When you go to sleep and enter the dream state, you actually wake up. And when you think you have woken up, you have actually gone to sleep. And that is the reality. That's what I've discovered. That is the reality. So let me explain this. Stanford University does a lot of work on lucid dreaming. I advise everybody to look at it. It is stunning. It shows you how reality actually works. And one of the things they use, and I use this to understand how asleep we really are. And they do a bunch of reality checks that you do to try to wake yourself up, to realize you're dreaming and wake up and become lucid in the dream. One of them is an experiment you can do, and you can try it. I can't do it for more than a minute without failing. What it is every time you go through a door frame, you touch the door frame, and you say to yourself, am I in the waking state or am I dreaming? Am I in the physical or am I in the non-local? You make it, and you do a reality check. You, in a dream state, you can sort of pull your finger and make it longer. You can put your finger through your hand. So you do a reality check. Touch the door frame. You can do it in your house. You're going to the bathroom. You go through 3 door frames. I've done it lots of times. Touch the door frame, do a reality check. Touch the door frame, do a reality check. Touch the door frame, do a reality check. Go to the bathroom, walk out, and go through all 3 door frames and not touch anything. It's almost impossible to do. And that's what's happening is we understand that the dream, the template reality is the dream state. We realize this in consciousness, but we keep falling back into the idea that we have a physical world with time and space. So try it sometime and you'll realize that you really don't have as much grasp of reality that you really think you do. And let's skip the aliens visiting thing here. This is one of the 2 prominent experiments to show consciousness. And these are the things that ended the physical world. One is the famous dual slit experiment. This is in about the 1920s, mid-1920s, and the idea is they're shooting photons through these 2 slits, and they suddenly discovered it left a wave pattern on the back of the screen, and it should have left this pattern. If things are physical particles, photons are physical particles, it should leave this pattern, but it's actually leaving the wave pattern. So they're trying to figure out what was the problem. So what they do is they put an observer. They try to measure which slit is the photon going through. So they put an observer, and as soon as they put the observer on, suddenly it turns into a particle. It leaves a particle pattern. They take the observer off, it goes back to a wave pattern. They put the observer on, it goes back to a wave, it goes back to a particle pattern again. And they take it off, and it basically, if you've got an observer, it's a particle. If you don't have an observer, it becomes a wave. And that's when you had this whole idea in the 1920s. It started in the 1920s, and I'll talk a little bit about the debate, was the role of consciousness. That you have quantum wave potentials, everything's a wave, and as soon as you have an observer, it turns to a particle. That you do not have a particle, you do not have a physical particle until there's an observer. As soon as you have an observer, the position, the electron or the photon will take a position in time and space. Unless there's an observer, it will not take a position, it will stay as a wave. And that to me is consciousness. It's basically got to do with awareness. People will say, no, it's not. I'll say, yes, the particle is aware, the wave potential is aware of whether there's an observer or not. It knows when there's an observer, it knows when there's not aware. That means it's aware of what is happening. Awareness is consciousness. So the basic particles are conscious. They'll say, that's not what it means. I say, yes, that is what it means. And we have the statement that awareness is actually more basic than consciousness. It is the original state, beginningless, endless, uncaused, unsupported, without parts, without change. Consciousness is on the contact or reflection against a surface, a state of duality. There can be no consciousness without awareness, but there can be awareness without consciousness, as in deep sleep. Awareness is absolute. Consciousness is relative. And this is a basic principle that I think we have to sort of start to realize, that all there is awareness, and it builds on consciousness. And the consciousness is secondary. The physical world is in third place. This is a slide by Amit Goswami, who came up with this idea that when you look at this experiment, it means that consciousness is upward, that it's downward, that it is consciousness is creating the physical world. The way it's taught in universities is the other way around, that you have particles that make bigger particles, that make atoms, that make molecules, that make neurons, that make brains, and the brain creates consciousness. And what the dual slit experiment says, no, a particle will not take a position in time and space unless there's an observer. So it's downward causation. The brain cannot create consciousness. Consciousness creates the brain. Consciousness is primary. And this is a slide that he shows quite often, and he's absolutely right. It's a downward causation. You cannot have physical material creating consciousness, because the dual slit experiment shows quite clearly that you do not have a physical particle until there's an observer. And Einstein hated this idea. This was this debate between Bohr and Einstein. Einstein was back in the Newtonian idea that there are particles. There are particles in space, in time and space, and the only time you're going to have anything interacting is when there's a force on one of the particles, so the particles bang into each other, that things are separate in the universe. And the whole consciousness thing basically says, no, there's just consciousness. And so this debate started, and Einstein hated these ideas. He hated the idea of quantum physics, the idea of the observer. He said, I'd like to believe that the moon is behind me when I'm not looking. And he, right till the end of his life, he even made a shot. In the last lecture he gave in his life was at Princeton University, and during that lecture he made the comment to John Wheeler, the guy that came up with the idea for the wormholes and black holes and stuff like that. It was at his seminar, and Wheeler said it's a participatory universe. Consciousness is primary. And so Einstein made the comment during that last lecture he gave. He said, if a mouse looks at the universe, does that change reality? And the answer is, yeah, probably. That consciousness is what's building reality. So Bohr, who introduced this idea about the fact, there was a number of them, there was Heisenberg, there was Bohr, there was Schrodinger, there was a bunch of these guys who came to the conclusion that consciousness is primary. That consciousness is the basic, and it's a participatory universe, and we are creating the universe with our consciousness. And Einstein hated it, and this debate started at the 1927 Solvay conference. Einstein actually stood up during the conference, and he disputed when Heisenberg and Bohr were presenting this idea, and he said, no, he couldn't believe it. because it leads to a lot of stuff that says it's not a physical universe, it's a conscious universe. The consciousness models here. So you have the two models. You have the Einstein model, which says local causation. The only time anything will be affected is when a force or a particle acts on another particle. The quantum model, the idea that came, this idea of consciousness, was that there's non-locality, sometimes described as the most important discovery in science, non-locality, where you can have particles that, things happening in one part of the universe which affect something else, and you don't have to have these particles banging into each other. And then this reality, we have this collective reality that we believe is physical because we all seem to think that it's physical. And John Wheeler said, reality grows out of the act of observation, and thus consciousness itself, it is participatory. He's talking about this consciousness being the main thing. And if you take a look at the research, either the Johns Hopkins research on psilocybin, or if you look at the research that's done, 40 years of research at Stanford University on lucid dreaming, you will see whether it's lucid dreaming or near-death experiences, religious experience, it is, the people will describe it as being the real world. It was more real than reality. And we'll say that consciousness is primary. When you get in these experiences and they suddenly realize it's really for real. Everything is one, everything's alive, everything's connected. And so this debate went on, and is still going on. But it sort of ended. It was like the Christopher Columbus discovering America. The world of separate individual objects interacting locally within time and space was transcended, revealing a realm where all things are non-locally united as an individual whole. And the individual whole is very important. I'm going to bring it up in the neurology thing, and it's also a very key idea that everything is one. Everything's connected. There's no time. There's no space. Everything is one. Heisenberg was the main guy who was pushing this. 1925. He started doing this. He's talking about the people who believe in the material world. They would prefer to come back to the idea of an objective real world whose smallest parts exist objectively in the same sense as stones or trees exist, independently of whether or not we observe them. And this guy won the Nobel Prize. Materialism rested upon the illusion that the kind of existence, the direct actuality of the world around us, can be extrapolated into the atomic range. This extrapolation is impossible, however. The naive, materialistic way of thinking is an obstacle to understanding the quantum concept of reality. So you have the Newtonian world, where you have the big objects and they work by Newtonian laws, and then you have the quantum world, which says, no, it doesn't work like that at all. It's this oneness, it's this no space, no time, non-locality type thing. And this battle has been going on. And when it happened, they just shut down. The idea was given that Richard Feynman here, that he was supposed to have said it, and they deny he said it. But someone said, shut up and calculate. We don't want to look at the implications of the dual slit experiment, and one experiment I'm going to show you in a second. We don't want to look at this. There was actually a PhD in quantum physics that was denied at the University of Colorado, where the guy that was doing the PhD, head of the committee, said, looking at the implications of these things in quantum physics is equivalent to studying ESP and UFOs, and you're not going there. And they shut down this PhD that was actually going to look at this. This is the second experiment that sort of ended the physical world. It's the one that most people know about. It's the one that Einstein really hated. He called it spooky action at a distance. This is the one where you take a particle, and you have two entangled particles, and you send one in this direction in space, and one in this direction of space at the speed of light, and then one's on one side of the universe, you change its spin, and the one on the other side will instantly change its spin. Non-local. There's no interaction, as Einstein said, where one has to bang into the other. It has to be a force. Non-local, instantaneously, on the other side of the universe, the thing will change its spin. Again, this shows that the primary particles in the universe are conscious, because the one particle knows what you did to the other particle. It is aware of what you did. It is conscious. And this consciousness thing goes all the way up the chain. You start looking at the work that was done by David Bohm, who came up with the idea of the holographic universe. He did the work on plasma in the 1940s and 1950s. He said, and he observed, he said, once electrons were in a plasma, they stopped behaving like individuals and started behaving as if they were part of a larger and interconnected whole. He later remarked that frequently, he later remarked that he frequently had the impression that the sea of electrons was in some sense alive. We go to the simple particles. You see this consciousness moving up. Some of the big neurosurgeon, or the people in the world today, scientists will say consciousness is an illusion. There's actually one new atheist who says consciousness, the only things that are conscious are human beings, and you only become conscious once you learn a language. And it's sort of like you're just sort of making up the rules. You can see consciousness all the way from atoms all the way out. Here's single cell organisms, and they can gather food, they can capture, evade capture, they can find mates, they have sex, and they learn, which means that these things are conscious. They have this ability to be aware of what's going on in their environment. This is an experiment that was done in Japan, and the guy got in a lot of trouble. He put this article in Nature magazine, and he used the word that these things were conscious, and he got in a lot of trouble. They tried to get him to withdraw this statement that it was conscious. What it is it's a single cell slime mold. They put it in a maze on the left-hand side, and it fills the whole maze, and it's looking for food, and it's in the maze. And then what they do is they put food at one side of the one door of the maze, and at the other door of the maze, and suddenly the thing evacuates all the channels where there's no food, and it will make a thin line from one source of food to the other. It works as one. It aligns itself, and it makes the most efficient way to gather the food from the two sources and evacuates all the other areas of the maze. When we get to human beings, you see it really. You see we have 100 trillion cells in our body. They all work as one. They're not fighting each other. They're all working as one. And basically, if all your cells don't work as one, you're in a lot of trouble. You have trouble if some cells decide that they're going to go and do their own thing. This is one of the things that really annoys me. When you get science, what a lot of science will do is they will say, well, we're explaining things. And they don't explain anything. They're describing things. So here's the simple, a single cell, starting cell of a stem cell moving from one cell to two cells. And you say, well, it just happens. And it's like, so they say, well, you get the spindles, and this happens, and the chromosomes, and all this stuff. And they're just describing what's happened. It's like describing Moses opening the Red Sea. But the thing is, how's the trick done? How does it actually do it? If you look at this process, and you say, this is not conscious, this is just happening, you have to explain this. There are 100 trillion atoms in 100 trillion atoms in a cell. So you have a stem cell, and it decides it's going to make the second stem, it's going to make the second cell. So what it has to do, and this is 500 times the stars in the Milky Way, it has to, number one, it does this over 15 to 24 hours. It's putting together cells at the rate of 11.5 million atoms in 1 second. He's putting these cells together. It has to source these atoms. Where does it find the atoms? It knows we can't do the first 10. We got 100 billion neurons in our brain. We can't put the first 10 cells together of a second cell. It is able to source the atoms. It finds them. It gathers all the atoms together. Then it puts them in the right place, puts them in the right order. It gives them life, and it's done in less than 24 hours. And we say, it just happens. Well, no, it doesn't just happen. That is showing consciousness. And we have 100 trillion atoms, and the original stem cell will be able to produce the 100 trillion cells in the human body. And in the human body, we have 50 million cells die every second. So in the time that I give my lectures, 4.5 billion cells will die in your body and will die in my body, and they will be replaced by other cells. This is all working as one. All of them are working as one unit, and it all works. They all know what to do. Each cell knows what it's supposed to do, and it just follows the instructions, working as one. This is an important one I had. This is sort of a small download I had. This is Tim Berners-Lee's, who is the guy who invented the World Wide Web, and he talked about the brain. And what he said, there are billions of neurons in our brains, but what are neurons? They're just cells. The brain has no knowledge until the connections are made between the neurons. All that we know, all that we are, comes the way our neurons are connected. And that's partly true, but it's not the full story. It is all connected. So what they basically say, it's like the internet. So you put all these things together, and then you get consciousness. Well, no, it isn't. We have, as far as I know, the last figure was 8.7 billion computers on the World Wide Web, on the internet, and you can link up 100 billion, like in our brain, you can link up 100 billion computers on the internet, and nothing is going to happen. Nothing. You can wire them, you can put power to them, nothing will happen. The only time something will happen is when you enter consciousness. when you put people behind those computers. The people behind the computers will input the information, they will input the software. You cannot have an internet without consciousness. It is, and so the internet is not a connection of computers, it is a connection of consciousnesses. And I believe that a lot of the computer stuff was done through LSD. I say if it wasn't for LSD, there would be no computers. Let me guarantee you. A lot of the computer stuff came from people who were doing LSD. And I believe that this was a download to teach us how the consciousness, the non-local consciousness in the universe works. Because that's basically how it's all linked together, and all the consciousnesses are one. So the internet, you have all these consciousnesses inputting stuff and pulling stuff out, and the non-local consciousness is just a bigger version of the internet. This is a critical point. What's the difference between an alien and human? What's the main difference? The main difference is aliens are telepathic, and we are not. That's the main difference. Aliens are telepathic. And we may say, well, we had a vision of something, a little drop of telepathy. They are purely conscious. When you ask an experiencer, and I've asked the experiencers, when you're on the ship and when the alien was talking to you telepathically, did you know what he was saying, or did you sort of know what he was saying? And they say, no, we knew what he was saying. It came with thought, emotion, feeling, everything. Everything came at once, this thing. And that's the whole key to the UFO thing. And that was the download that I got, which I'll explain in a minute. The other thing that aliens have, or that have different from us, is it appears that aliens don't sleep. And that we've already learned in lucid dreaming, that people who can do, the people who have perfected, monks who have perfected dream yoga, never lose consciousness. Their bodies will rest, but they will still be conscious. And this is this idea that we are starting to learn that if through lucid dreaming you can actually stay conscious. If you can learn to be lucid in your dream, you can stay conscious when you're asleep. Your body will sleep, but your mind will still be awake. You will never lose consciousness. And so the aliens will say that they don't sleep, that they live in this dream world. And so when you talk to experiencers, a lot of experiencers will say to me, I had an experience, but I didn't get abducted. It just came in a dream. And Bashar will say, yeah, it comes in a dream because that's our world. You're in our world. That's when we talk to you in your dreams. The dream world is the real world. It is the real reality. Now here's my download, and this links into this whole thing. I'm at a lecture in Phoenix, Arizona. It's February 26, 2012. I'm watching a lecture by Colin Andrews on crop circles. I have no interest in crop circles. The only reason I'm in the room is because he's a high-profile figure, and I figure I should pay him the respect, go watch his lecture. He's lecturing on consciousness in crop circles. So he's lecturing, and suddenly it came instantaneously. That's the only thing I can explain. And the most important part of the whole download, which you will, when you get people who get songs in their head or get inspirations like Einstein, his whole career was based on this dream. He knew it was important. He knew he had to remember this. It comes with absolute certainty. You don't have to check this. You don't have to do experiments. This is how it works. So what happened is I gathered all this material during my life. I'd been in UFOs for 37 years. I was basically asleep. Suddenly, 3 things that I had researched suddenly popped in my head like that, boom. And it was like, oh, that's how it works. And it was like, came with absolute certainty. Here's the 3 things that came into my head. I worked when I had my UFO sighting. I went after the Canadian government. I went after all the Canadian government documents. The #1 guy that ran the Canadian government UFO program from 1950 to 1954 was a guy who was in contact with aliens. He believed in the whole consciousness aspect to it. He goes to the Americans in September of 1950, and the Canadians ask the Americans through classified channels. They ask them the question, what's the deal with flying saucers? What's really going on? You got to remember, this is when it first starts, 1950. And they're told 4 things. The matter is the most highly classified subject in the United States, rated higher than the H-bomb. Flying saucers exist. Their modus operandi is unknown. There's a small group by Vannevar Bush who's running this thing. This is important. The entire matter is considered by the United States authorities to be of tremendous significance. So I ran around, I talked about this document. It's one of the few top secret documents in the world on UFOs. And the Canadian government does not deny this document is legitimate. It's in their archives. The very next line of that document popped into my head during this download. So boom. And it said, the very next line said, and I was further informed by United States authorities are investigating along a number of lines which might possibly be related to the flying saucers, such as mental phenomena. And I gather they aren't doing well because they've indicated as Canada's doing anything, they're willing to exchange credentials and talk to us. So he says, mental phenomena. There was nobody talking about being abducted in 1950. There was no contactees in 1950. There was nobody publicly in 1950 saying that they were talking to aliens. So how did they know that there was this mental phenomena? I say it was because in Roswell in 1947, they recovered a flying saucer. There was 3 dead aliens and there was one live alien. And when they picked up the live alien, it was talking in their heads, and they went, wow. And they realized the significance of, could they develop this technology of talking in people's heads and reading people's minds? And they did all the MK Ultra stuff, and so that popped into my head, the Canadians. And suddenly I realized, oh, that's what they were talking about. That's what he meant by mental phenomena. The second one was, this is the former president of Penn State University. He's got 14 honorary doctorate degrees. He was the chairman of the board of the Institute for Defense Analysis, the top military think tank in the United States. We're talking to him, and we had interviews, and we realized he had been at a series of briefings on a crash recovery. And so we were talking to him, and we were asking about the control group. And we said, is the control group still 12 people, or is it all Americans, or what's going on? And he said, let me ask you a question. What do you know about ESP? And the guy from Great Britain who was interviewing him didn't really have an answer. He said, look, unless you understand about ESP and how it works, you will not be taken in by the control group. Very few people understood it. Very few people understand it. That was 1991. I had no idea what he was talking about. No idea. When that download came out, I went, oh, that's what he's talking about. ESP. He said, you have to know about ESP to understand the UFO phenomenon, what's actually going on. The third one was Ben Rich. He gives a lecture here at UCLA, 1993, March of 1993, UCLA alumni, engineering alumni. He gives a lecture, the last slide he shows is a flying saucer. He says, we now have the technology to take ET home. A bunch of people start asking him questions. Jan Hartson, who's now the international director for MUFON, has had a UFO experience. I believe he's an abductee when he's 9 years old. He has this experience. He's fascinated. His whole life he becomes an electrical engineer. He needs to know how UFOs are propelled. So he goes to Ben Rich as he's leaving the building, and he said, Ben, I need to know, how do they get here? How does it work? And Ben turns around and he says exactly what Walker said 2 years earlier. He said, let me ask you a question. What do you know about ESP? And Jan Hartson said, it means everything in time and space is connected. And Ben said, that's how it works. And he walks out, and that is how it works. That's how they get here. You have the entangled particle experiment. You have one on one side of the universe, one on the other side of the universe. This experiment was done in 1982 in Paris. It's proved. You affect the one particle, the other one knows what you're doing. And so the whole thing is, if we detonate an atomic bomb in 1945, and everything in time and space is connected, is the rest of the universe going to know that we detonated an atomic bomb? Damn right they're going to know. Everybody's going to know. And anybody who understands the oneness principle, who's at that elevated telepathic level, will know. And so it is no surprise that in 1945 suddenly the UFO started appearing en masse after we detonated the first atomic bomb. And then it comes down to the whole idea of entangled particles. If you understand how the universe works, if you understand the entangled particle, that everything is one and there's no time and space, can you just move like an entangled particle from one part of the universe to another part of the universe? And that's what Ben Rich is saying. That's how the propulsion system, that's how they get here. Everything in time and space is connected. So you get this direct connection. Here's the Moody Blues. Here's a song that they wrote. When you get down to this thing about how do you move through time and space, they said they were getting downloaded information into their songs. Here's one of their songs talking about flying through space. Thinking is the best way to go. In 2000, when I started my consciousness thing, I did a lecture in Phoenix, Arizona. And I did it, and I thought I had solved it. It was like when I came here to Consciousness Expo. It was the first time I've been here, and I saw the people, and I went, holy cow, everybody knows. I mean, I'm the last guy to know. Everybody seemed to, all these people that were into this, and it's like I was asleep. What happens is, I give this lecture, and they say, there's this woman. Are you going to talk to this woman? And I thought, well, I must agree to talk to her or whatever. And I said, oh, okay, I'll talk to her. And they say, okay, she's coming to my house. I'm staying at this woman's house who's hosting me. She says, she's coming to the house on Monday. I'm going to work, and she's going to come. And this woman comes, and she's in her 70s, and she's got her partner with her. And they come in and say, what did Stacy say about me? And I said, I don't know, I'm just supposed to talk to you. She said, that's good. She comes walking in, and she starts on remote viewing, and she's been abducted, and she's a kid, and aliens are flying around. She's a little kid. She's telling all stuff, and you hear all this stuff, and it's like, okay, whatever. She's telling me the story, And then at one point she says to me, she's talking, she says, yeah, and last night I was flying the saucer. And I went, what? I said, you were flying the saucer? She says, yeah. I said, you flew the flying saucer? They let you do it? She said, yeah. And so what's the obvious question? It's like, well, how do you fly a flying saucer? And she said, you do it with your mind. And suddenly I went, oh, that's why they wanted me to talk to this woman. That's what all the secrecy was about. You do it with your mind. 37 years I've been working on UFOs. I'd never heard any such thing in my life. And I went, wow. I mean, I just saw it. And within a year, I had talked to 24 people, mostly women. And they would say, oh, I've had these flying dreams. I'm flying this ship or whatever. I said, hang on. How do you fly it? And they said, you do it with your mind. Everybody said exactly the same. Nobody said anything different. I now have like 36 people. And what you get, well, here's Cat Stevens. Let me play Cat Stevens. Cat Stevens was abducted in the 1970s. He writes 2 songs about his abduction experience. One is called Longboats, and one is called Freezing Steel. Here's the lyrics from Freezing Steel. He was on the ship without the guiding wheel. There's no steering wheel. It's flown with the mind. When this free survey came out, they asked this question to the people in the survey, the 2,500 people. Well, earlier it was asked in stage 1. So they asked, do you ever recall operating a UFO craft? 13.19% said, yeah, I've flown the craft. And so I say, and I get into evil aliens and I sort of drop it because people still like the idea of evil or whatever. I say, well, if you believe in evil aliens, why are they letting people fly the flying saucer? We think we're the good guys. I mean, Saudi Arabia, if you're a woman, you cannot drive a car. It's illegal for you to drive a car. But if the aliens abduct you, they will let you fly the ship, no insurance, no license, nothing. There, fly the craft. It's a huge percentage of people. 13% of experiencers say they have been allowed to fly the craft. So why are they allowing, the same thing as they give people ultimate knowledge and downloads and stuff, why are they letting people fly the craft? It's something I think we should be looking at. Susie Hansen, this is a woman that's become very popular in the UFO field. She talked to me. She said when she first wrote out how she flew the flying saucer, it was 22 type pages. Here's her thing. She said, the mail asked me to connect to the craft's consciousness by placing my hand on a small pad, thereby opening a channel of communication between my thoughts and energy and that of the craft and its technology. For a second, I felt an electric tingle radiate across the palm of my hand as it read my electric field. And she talks about flying. She said they allowed her to fly with a stick and with her mind, and it was easier to fly the craft with her mind. And now I'm going to play you an audio of Chris Bledsoe. Now, hopefully you can hear it in the back. He's from North Carolina. This is the one that Mel Gibson was going to do a movie on this guy. It's an incredible story. He told me a couple months ago that he was flying the craft, and I said, you flew the craft? I've known him for a while. I said, you flew the craft? I said, I want to tape it. I want you to tell me from start to finish, how do you fly a flying saucer? So here, 4 minutes of him talking about how do you fly a flying saucer. He describes the exact process.
When I walk into the craft, from the outside, it's shaped like an egg. And it's faceted, but in the shape of the I'm looking at the outside of the craft. The skin, that's what the skin appears like on a tiny ball, really tiny, like under pumps. But as it comes alive, this craft, you can make it expand and get bigger. Little inch turning bigger. Okay, so entering into the craft, there's this round area towards the front, and there's this pedestal that was sort of like a raised area on this, near this constant. It's like a pedestal, and on top of it is a beehive, half of a beehive, like half of a basketball size, that size. So it's not quite round, but it's kind of black carbon fiber texture on the outside. But in the shape of honeycomb, everything's like a honeycomb. But micro, tiny. But when I laid my hand on it, they showed me to lay my hand on it. If I did, where my hand was turned into this deep purple violet color, and then it began to change that color. And I went through the purples and blues into the greens and got to this aqua color, like an aquamarine. The whole thing lit up, this pedestal. It all happened very quick. manic at all, and just put my hands on it, clear the way, the sharpest colors, boom, and lights up in the inside of the glass, being like that. And that's when I see from the inside the same texture as on the outside of the glass. Rooms that we were saying, how thoughts begin to glow. It's sort of like LED dots, I always describe it as saying, looking at it in small scale, but then we begin to go to each one with like mechanical gears. You see it as a connection to the craft. The craft becomes alive, and it turns into this geometric, huge honeycomb shapes. All the little ones are gone now, they're really big. And then after all that startup process happened, all of them just seconds really, this is part of me. If I look at something and I want to be there, that's what we do. And it keeps you, I mean, it leads you, it guides you, it's with you. I've never seen a stick that you got it. It's always been just thought. I had the greatest time going down the river, just shouting, sitting cross-legged on the floor, looking through the front of the craft, and it's clear as glass. And I'm right down on top of the water, just streaming down the river.
A number of years ago, a guy by the name of David Adair told basically the same story. It was always been seen as a hoax in the UFO community. He tells the story about being at Area 51 and being shown an engine below Area 51 in a subterranean area. And that he said he put his hand on it and it made the same thing as Chris Bledsoe was describing, this sort of images of stuff coming off, and he suddenly realized he believed the engine was alive. And what he did was he talked about the fact that he had been at Princeton University where they had the Pear Lab, the lab where they did the consciousness work on affecting matter. James McDonald financed this, and James McDonald had the idea that a pilot could interfere with his mind with the craft, and that's why he was financing this research. And what David Adair says is that they were working on this. So I started looking at this whole thing, and that's when I came across this experiment, this dramatic experiment. And I always ask people, how many in this room can fly an F-22 jet fighter simulator? Nobody. Okay, we got 100 billion neurons. Here's when I looked at this thing about, the story was that Pear Lab had been given the job of putting shielding so that the armament on an F-22 wouldn't go off to stop the mine from interfering with the armaments. So I started doing the Google searches, and I come across this experiment from the University of Southern Florida. And what they're going to do here is you're going to see 20,000 neurons from a rat brain. And what they do is they take 20,000 neurons and they put them in a petri dish, and then you see the brain starts, you have independent neurons. And then suddenly the neurons start talking with each other, and they make connections, and suddenly you have this a small brain. And they teach it to fly an F-22 simulator. So here's the video.
Some scientists have already been experimenting with such brain beams. Their tubes were less precise, but the results sometimes remarkable.
Disconnect the light show.
Dr. Demorse, for instance, tries to communicate with his brain dishes and teach them several tasks.
So each of these dishes contains about 20,000 or so neurons, which are firing away as we speak. So each one's an individual network, and they'll fire spontaneously. We take living rat neurons, and they will rapidly form a neural network. And we have this grid of electrodes underneath the surface of these living neurons. And we can listen to the conversation among the neurons. And we can also stimulate activity within that network. We can send in different patterns of stimulation and look at how the network changes as a result of those stimulations. And that's how we do what we do.
What he does is to teach his brain dishes how to control an airplane.
The network can essentially fly the aircraft in a pretty optimal way. So it won't overcorrect too much, and it'll be able to stabilize it in a wide variety of conditions. I think I programmed like a 50-knot crosswind into this one.
So they've done that. They've also done, here's a robot with 300,000 neurons from a rat brain. and they're giving instructions, remote instructions to the neurons, and it's driving around. I'm going to skip some of these things here. DeMars is talking about the amazing processing power of the brain, and it comes from all these neurons cooperating, working together to produce something. It's not independent neurons. You'd figure the neurons would just stay independent. They actually start to work together, and they can do this kind of stuff. Here's Denise Stoner, who's the assistant for MUFON for abductions. Here's her talking about being on the craft and being shown the power plant. In the power plant, the ship was alive. Here's her describing actually talking to the power plant of the craft.
And there were kind of runways that went to the center of this room, but there was an actual liquid running under the floor. And it was red, but it had a swirling effect to it, and I knew it was very similar to blood. And I knew that it kept this system alive. And I knew that it was running in and out of a center core that I saw, but it had coils that ran around the center core. And I knew that some of the coils had organic and biological stuff within them. And I knew that the center core was more or less a brain of the operation, and that it could also talk to other systems like itself out in the universe, that huge expanse, that they could communicate their locations, what they were doing, why they were doing it, and whether or not they would be able to reach each other. There were so many things that were passed into me in such a quick amount of time.
I'm going to skip this. This is Jill Bolte Taylor. If you have not seen her, I was going to play 3 minutes, but I'm running out of time. She's a neurosurgeon from Harvard University, worked for the Harvard Brain Bank, has a left brain hemorrhage. And she describes it in a TED Talk. It's an 18-minute TED Talk. It's the second most popular TED Talk of all times, where she talks about what happens when her left brain shuts down. And that's where I'm going. I want to get to the neurology stuff, the right brain, left brain stuff. And she talks about this whole thing. This is an important slide. You have right brain, left brain. I didn't make up this stuff. This is all over the internet. You can look at all this stuff. And this comes from split brain research, so I'm going to quickly explain in a second. You have a left brain. Your left brain is where your ego is. It's ego mind. It believes in separateness. It's rational, analytical. It's where your language center is. The left brain can talk. So when I'm talking, it's my left brain talking. When I talk to you, it's left brain. Your right brain cannot talk. It has no ability to talk. It can communicate. We can communicate with it, but it doesn't talk. On the right brain, on the other hand, you have oneness, believes in oneness. It's egoless. It's subjective. It can't talk. It sees the big picture. It's here now. There's no time and space. It has these things. So you have two different brains, whereas neurology will tell you it's just one brain, and it's just an epiphenomena of the brain, and it's illusion and all sorts of stuff. And you basically see there you have two brains. And if you take a look at the actual split brain research that was done, they'll actually say you have like thousands of modules in your brain. One does visual, one does audio, one does balance, one does this, and these thousands of modules all work together in 1/10 of a second to give you the impression that it's all one thing, and you're seeing everything, and all the inputs are all processed, and it's called the binding problem. And neurology doesn't want to talk about the binding problem. How does it put this all together? How does the consciousness actually work? So you have this right brain, left brain thing, and I say that's the basis of how this whole thing works. So Jill Bolte Taylor's talking, she talks about separateness of the left brain, ego brain. So when she has her left brain hemorrhage, she loses her ego. She believes everything's one. She's one with the universe. Her particles are melding with the wall and stuff like that. And I'm going to skip over that because I want to get to the. I want to get this synchronicity. I'll drop over. If you don't believe me, check Michael Gazzaniga, Split Brain. This is how it works. This is important to understand. What they do is, when you have epilepsy patients, what they would do is they cut the corpus callosum between the two brains. Now the brains cannot communicate. Right brain cannot communicate with left brain. What they do is, to test these people, is they'll give you a dot on the screen. They say, look at the dot, and then what they do is they produce an image just for a split second. And the image is car. So it's coming through your right eye, which goes to your left brain. You got to realize your left brain runs the right side of your body. The right brain runs the left side of the body. So when it comes through the right eye, it's going to the left brain, and you say, what did you see? And of course, you're talking to the left brain, can talk. So the car, it says, I saw a car. So then they go and then they show it through the other eye, and it's going to your right brain. Your right brain can't talk. So then they say to the person, the split brain person, they say, "What'd you see?" Didn't see anything, because they didn't. The right brain saw it, but it can't talk. So they were doing these experiments where they were talking to one brain and then talking to the other brain, and that's where they came up with all these things about where the ego is, what the right brain does, and they're two different brains. They actually fight with each other. They're totally different entities. And what they'll do is they'll show two images at the same time, and they say to the person, "What did you see?" Of course, the person is going to say, "I saw the hammer," because it's coming in the right eye, going to the left brain. The left brain can talk, and the other side of the brain, the right brain, who saw the apple, can't talk, so he doesn't say. So then they say to the left, to the right brain, to the left hand, they say, "Take your left hand and pick off the table what you saw." Now you're talking to the right brain. So the left hand goes and picks up the apple. Then they say to the guy, "Why do you pick up an apple?" And now you're talking to the left brain again, and it has no idea. This is critically important, because what it comes down to is what they call in neurology a storyteller, an interpreter. I call the pathological liar. It's in your left brain, and what it is, this is where all skepticism comes from. What it is in your left brain you have what they call a storyteller and interpreter. To keep the story consistent, that you're in this physical world, that you're keeping things under control. When things become inconsistent, when suddenly the left hand picks up the apple and you don't know why it picked up the apple, it is there to fill a hole. There's a hole in the story, so it fills the hole. It says, "Oh, I was hungry." And every single time, this is proven, every single time it will make up a story. Every single time it will be wrong, and what it is to fill a hole. It's just quickly fill a hole. So when you're talking to your friends and you're talking about woo stuff or UFOs or whatever, and their story, their consistent story is that there are no UFOs, there's no consciousness stuff, there's no woo stuff, and you suddenly put a hole in their worldview, that left brain interpreter is going to say, "Oh, you're just imagining." That's where skepticism comes from. It comes from this left brain storytelling, and they've done a lot of research on it, but they don't talk about it because it doesn't really fit the idea that there's just an illusionary consciousness. So I'll skip this. This is the right brain, left brain fighting with each other. The left brain really can't do very much of anything. It can't put together the simplest puzzle. It's very limited. And the left brain can do 40 bits. The right brain can do 40 million bits of information at a time. The left brain can only do 4 items at a time. Once you get 4 phone numbers or 4 names or something, it loses control. It can't remember anything. It only has a 10, 20-second memory. Musicians are all very right brain. They're relying on this intuition type thing, whereas people who learn music, who memorize music and practice music are doing left brain music. Okay, mathematics. This is basically the sort of the end. We got 9 minutes. Okay, this is the end. This is a book by Stephen King. Stephen King got most of his stuff from lucid dreams. He got this stuff, and he uses an expression which I use that explains what's going on with paranormal phenomena. I'll explain all paranormal phenomena. It's SSDD, same shit, different day. That's what it is. It's all the same thing. We parse it. We say, "Oh, this is like," experiencers will tell me, "Oh, I'm an experiencer. Don't talk to me about channelers. I'm not a channeler." And I say, "No, it's all the same stuff. It's just you're tapping into a different sort of way." So here's what it comes down to. What I found, and I wrote this whole manuscript on this, is if you take a look at whatever it is, say dowsing, tarot cards, whatever, you quiet the left brain and allow the right brain to come up with the answer. UFO abductees. Roger Lear, who's here from Los Angeles, who did the alien implant stuff, was asked, he did 16 alien implant removals. He was asked, "What's the common characteristic of all the 17 people you did?" He said there's 2 common characteristics. Number 1, they're all right brain creative people, and number 2, all the implants are on the left side of the body. Why would they put the implants on the left side of the body? They're affecting the right brain. They're going to the non-local brain. They're not going to the rational analytical brain. All implants are on the left side of the body. So that's what Lear said. Remote viewing. To do remote viewing, if you listen to McMonagle or one of these guys, you've got to kill the ego mind. You've got to shut down that left brain. Once you can shut the left brain down, then you can do the remote viewing. Hypnosis. You quiet the left brain. You enable the right brain to tap into the Akashic record or whatever you're doing. Psychic phenomena is the same sort of thing, but mediums is even better. Mediums. One study was done of mediums that showed that of 16 mediums, 13 had childhood sex abuse, childhood abuse issues, whether it's sexual abuse or violence or whatever. And what that is dissociation. that if you're a child and you learn to dissociate, to shut down the physical world, it's such a terrible world, you're able to shut it down, you can end up becoming a medium because you're able to tap into the other world. You're shutting this left brain thing down. Meditation, same thing. You got to quiet the left brain. Psychedelics. If you talk to people about psychedelics, the number one thing they'll describe if you do high dose psychedelics is it crushed the ego. The left brain completely gets shut down, and you get thrown into the non-local world of non-local consciousness. It's shutting the left brain down. Religious experience is the same thing. It comes in dreams. Dreams are right brain. Your physical mind is your waking consciousness. Your right brain is the dream consciousness. Savants, all savants who can do these things where Rain Man, 12,000 books. He could tell you what was on every single page of every single book and totally memorized. John von Neumann, same thing. He knew everything he'd ever read, including the footnotes. And that kind of stuff is coming out of the right brain. It has this unbelievable ability. You're just tapping into the record where all this material is kept. Aliens, they're purely telepathic. Right brain, the reason we can't go through time and space and we can't communicate with aliens is because we're not telepathic. That's a right brain function. Spirit voices, energy healing is right brain. It's basically all the same thing. It's basically shutting down the left brain and allowing the right brain to access this non-local consciousness. So here's the end. Basically what it comes down to is we believe there's physical reality, and in the sort of the outside world, physical reality, and if you say you're psychic or you've seen a UFO or whatever, that's outside this physical world. That can't possibly exist, so that's outside, and then you say, well, it's an illusion, you make up some sort of thing, and basically it's the other way around. It's basically the idea that the template reality, the real reality, and especially if you look at the lucid dream research, the template reality is the dream world. Once you get into the dream world and into that's sort of the lucid dream world, not the regular dream world. The lucid dream world, that's where the reality is, and the physical is on the outside. You sort of go back into the physical, but reality is basically at that template level. We have two different things. In the end of the 19th century, basically, the first guy who won the Nobel Prize for physics, American to win a Nobel Prize, said, "We've discovered everything. All we got to do is go to 6 decimal places. We've discovered everything." And that's the impression that science will give you today. We understand everything. I believe it's more like Thomas Edison said, we do not know 1 millionth to 1% about anything. But what you have is you have these experiencers who have tapped into this thing, where 37% of them are saying at one point they knew the answer to everything, that they're getting these downloads, they're getting these inspirations. And I think it's the onus is on us to look at them, to see and analyze this material, that we can find a lot of answers to what we're looking for. And I think that's basically it. Again, it comes down to this matrix thing where people are given everything. And Aldous Huxley described it as the left brain, the physical world. You have the left brain, which creates a filter, which filters out consciousness, and down to the point where you can survive in the physical world. It gives you that conscious reality. But if you use meditation, psychedelics, whatever technique, you open the filter up and you're able to access that other side of the world. And we are starting to learn how to do it. One girl that I just talked to, and this is my last slide, she talked to me about, she was given a download, and she lives in my city, and she said the way it was described to her by the aliens is her body was like a tray with popsicle sticks, and the mind was the fluid, and that when they wanted to do a download, they stick the popsicle stick in, and when the popsicle stick is in, then the download is coming. And then they start picking the popsicle stick, and everybody knows this in a dream. When you have a dream and you say, oh, I'll remember the dream, and you wake up and you're trying to remember the dream, they're pulling the popsicle stick out, and it's like water going down a drain. You're going, no, 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 and it's leaving. And that's for shutting the filter down. That's what it comes down. The download, they do the download, when they pull the download out, and that's what happens when they give people access to all the information. They pull the popsicle stick out, and all that information leaves, but the people will remember the fact that at one point they knew the answer to everything in the universe. To me, that's extremely important. Thank you.